But work, work, work. Somebody got to make these videos. Somebody got to answer these emails. Okay. We are live. Yes. Okay. Chapter 2, the ideology of idiotism. It is generally accepted that the founding father of free market economics is Adam Smith. It's in his work, is his work that remains the foundation stone for the ideology of idiotism. It is his work. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to read everything twice today. While I return to remarks already made about the structure of ideology at the end of this chapter, it's important to spend some time here setting out the content of this particular worldview to understand and contest its basic axioms. Smith's book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, was first published in 1776, the same year as the United States of America, declaring its independence and establishing a free enterprise as the cornerstone of its civil religion. Hey, JM. Hey, Megan. Smith's book, like all great works, transcended the boundaries of the academy and the discipline of economics that was its primary focus to establish itself in the popular consciousness. That was its primary. Okay. With this extent, it can be reduced to two famous words, invisible hand. With this phrase, Adam Smith was able to tap into the deep-rooted religiosity of a secular discipline and give the free market a near divine status in the economic, political thought that was to follow. Okay, so I don't know if he's going to continue this, but he's basically saying we set capitalism up as God. So that's kind of what's happening here, I think. Although writing, with this phrase, although writing as a man steeped in the tradition of scientific enlightenment, Smith nevertheless presented a view of economics with a deeply theological overtone. As will be noted when returning to the structure of ideology, at a time in which the assumed natural order of things was being challenged on a number of levels, the idea of the market reflected a hidden harmony that would have resonated with great power. Yeah, he's gonna do the whole Hayek thing. I suspect this is gonna echo Eye of the Master, or I think it will. We'll see. Two of the key passages from Wealth of Nations that have become central to the ideology of idiotism discuss the importance and the pursuit of self-interest as the path to both a furtherance of those private interests and the interests of society as a whole. In Book 1, in the course of bemoaning the fact that humans are almost the only beings who, once they reach maturity, fail to achieve independence, he writes, "Man has an almost constant occasion for the help of his brethren, and it's in vain for him to expect it from their benevolence only. He will be more likely to prevail if he can interest their self-love in his favor and shew that it is for their own advantage to do for him what he requires. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interests. Here it's capitalist self-love rather than a collectivist love of others that is the prime mover and social regulator." Second, in Book 4, the invisible hand passage reads as follows. "As every individual endeavors as much as he can to both employ his capital in support of the domestic private industry, every individual necessarily labors to render the annual revenue of the society as great as he can. He generally, indeed, neither intends to promote the public interest nor knows how much he's promoting it. By preferring the support of domestic industry, he intends only his security, led by the invisible hand, to promote an end which was no part of his intention. I've never known much good done by those who are affected to trade for the public good." So basically, he's already kind of setting up the privatization mode, but he's saying instead of it being like a global thing that people want to endeavor towards, a global good, it's the private nation's good. So it's not exactly private in that it's just for me, but it's private in that it's closed off for anyone outside of my national economic interest. But saying the public good, I'm assuming he means, because he's saying domestic and in brackets it's saying private. So I'm assuming public means kind of a global thing. But then again, you have to consider 1776. They're probably not thinking very globally. So I'm not exactly sure if the metaphor is something that Curtis is extending or if it's Smith. But let's read on. In this passage, the priority of the pursuit of private concerns is once more privileged, but importantly, for idiotism to make a central claim regarding the dangers of directly and intentionally pursuing what might be deemed the public good. Um, whatever the public good is, that's part of the question, though. However, what has not been handed down as part of the popular digest of The Wealth of Nations is the point at which Adam Smith directly contradicts himself and sets out in as much detail precisely how and why the public good should be pursued. The fact that he earlier published an influential book on moral sentiments has always been something of a problem for the ideological purists who wish to reduce everything to the functioning of the free market. And Book 5 of Wealth of Nations introduces further difficulties for the doctrinaire free marketeers. Interestingly enough, this problem emerges directly out of the principal method of social organization that's almost universally recognized by orthodox economists as contributing to the greatest wealth and advancement of nations, the division of labor. Yeah, already we're already getting echoes of "I am the master," but this division of labor, there's going to be some. He's saying something different than what Matteo was saying. This mode of organization is of such importance to Smith that it is the subject of the first chapter of Book 1. As far as it can be deployed, this method of social organization, he argues, will occasion in every part a proportional increase of the productive powers of labor. It creates particular talents as people find it in their interest to pursue a particular line of productivity or service that's in demand. The division of labor, however, is insufficient on its own. It needs to be accompanied by the ability to barter and exchange in order to bring the differing talents to fruition and fully develop social productivity. It's peculiar to humans to do this. For Smith, different breeds of dogs with their varying talents are unable to get together to tackle a problem more swiftly or more efficiently because they lack the capacity to barter and exchange. JM, we're on page 31, which feels, I'm like, damn, how did we get there already? But yeah, we're on page 31. Are you okay in there, babe? Kenneth? Ken? Okay. In the natural world, then, the pursuit of a very frigid, fixed, or closed self interest is very limiting, if not entirely counterproductive. Here, then, is the first problem for the ideology of the private. The division of labor presupposes a sense for cooperation and social roles. Indeed, for Smith, the division of labor emerges out of this prior sociality. Smith's self interest is not absolute, but premised on a sense of social need or doing what the existing social organization suggests is the best thing to do. Okay, so he did not actually say what Curtis is saying he said. So Curtis is like, oh, there's a big contradiction in Smith that he says we shouldn't do what's best for the public good. But the division of labor serves as an example of how Smith inherently believes that we should be doing what's best for the whole, because the division of labor is ultimately going to bring about a greater productivity. Now, I would say there's kind of an intent piece here. What is the intent of the division of labor? Now, Matteo and Matteo Pasquinelli, I Have the Master, our book from 2 months ago, says that it's meant to increase productivity. Babbage kind of came up with this to increase productivity. Ultimately, it wasn't exactly that they were trying to exploit people, but they were trying to maximize or optimize the amount of work and effort they could get out of people. Urban philosopher Curtis Blow says these are the breaks. Yeah, pretty much. What's up, Blurty? Good to see you. Your video the other day was hilarious. I am gay. It was great. I loved it. The person in the tribe who makes bows and arrows and does so in pursuit of his own self-interest, but this possibility only emerges out of his relations with other members in the tribe and by extension with other tribes. This may appear to be a very technical point, but the status of the collective is at stake here. Let me read that again. So the person making bows and arrows does so for his self-interest, but it only emerges out of the possibility or out of the relations with other people in his tribe and other tribes. So ultimately, we're trying to further the species unconsciously. There's an unconscious collective action, is what Curtis is claiming here. As we will see, the collective is driven out of free market analysis by Smith's 20th century followers. But in Smith himself, if we read carefully, the collective and the social are a priori conditions for the emergence of individual talents. To me, this is such an obvious thing. Like, duh. But the question is, how important is it? How important is that if you homogenize everything, what happens when you homogenize everything? Or what happens when you individualize everything? It is, I mean, to me, what I think obviously is it's cyclical, and we see changes, ebbs and flows, and this kind of thing. It's certainly not something that can be cut away to leave the purity of private interests standing in the full glory of their independence. In fact, what emerges as economic roles stems from already existing social roles that purely economic functions can never transcend. What's more, the opening analysis of the division of labor also shows Smith to be something of a social constructivist, which is an undoubted problem for his more conservative disciples. While all capitalists would argue that one of the wonders of the system is its capacity to foster social mobility, there are many who argue that a person's position in the social hierarchy is determined by natural talent. Those who are unsuccessful, which today means poor, are so due to an unfortunate but innate lack of talent, if not laziness. I mean, I wonder if people really think that. Like, do y'all think people really think that if you're poor, it's just kind of your own fault? Like, what was the line from what's his name? What was that guy? Ryan, Paul Ryan. Was it Paul Ryan or Ryan Paul? I can't remember. Either way, never trust a man with two first names. But when he said like, what was the meme? Just stop being poor. I mean, I took that to be a bit of like tongue in cheek, but I don't know. That Smith should maintain the division of labor is a result of functional differentiation within society and is not to be taken as the marker of natural divisions premised on talents inherent in individuals from birth is interesting because it raises the issue of respect for and equality of occupations that tend to be more central to collectivist or social theories of social organization. On the natural talents, Smith remarks that the difference between individuals is actually much less than we are aware of, and the very different genius which appears also to distinguish men of different professions. When grown up to maturity is not upon many occasions so much the cause as the effect of the division of labor. Yeah, so what we see, okay, and you know who else says this? Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell also says something similar that when you give people resources, I'm paraphrasing, you give people resources, an abundance of resources, and you give another group of people a lack of resources for generations, you're basically going to have two different sets of people. And so, whatever talent or whatever comes out of that, whatever advantages, it's not the cause, but rather the effect of this differentiation. The difference, and I would argue there's something in between that you can't say it's emergent. I don't like the whole like cause and effect thing. Like things emerge rather than are like entirely dependent upon something. The difference between the most dissimilar characters between a philosopher and a common street porter, for example, seem to arise not so much from nature, but habit, custom, and education. Had this come from a Marxist treatise on equality of occupation, it would not seem out of place. One can only surmise from this passage, then, if the talents emerging at maturity are the effect of the division of labor, what other talents, characteristics, and dispositions are the effect of our mode of social organization? In many respects, self interest and competition can only be assumed as primary and pre social if some artificial firewall is built between these traits and other socially molded characteristics. I wonder what this means, like some artificial firewall. So, self interest and so he's basically saying, like, um, what's the artificial firewall between self interest and altruism? I don't understand what that means. Is there an artificial firewall built? Yeah, I think so. So basically he's like, This self-interest and this idea of competition, um, they're not exactly primary, or maybe pre-social is an okay word to use, but they wouldn't be exactly primary because they evolved and like emerged with more social elements. If these two issues are suggestive of problems when advocating the division and free exchange of labor and its products, Smith is absolutely adamant in Book 5 that the division of labor can be so detrimental to society in one important respect that intervention on behalf of the state or sovereign is actually imperative. Book 5 is interesting for two directly related reasons. The first is that it contains Smith's arguments for the nature and necessity of public works. Second, sorry, market. Second, despite the book being almost a quarter of the complete text, it is the book that is most readily excised in the varying abridged version. There's something about Book 5 that is very unsmith like, but this is only because the Adam Smith we've come to know and love, has been effectively divorced from any suggestion that public works are either worthwhile or necessary. Yeah, that's like a PR thing. That's like a modern PR thing. And I don't know enough about economics to really tell the tale of how that happened. Much in the way he's been divorced from his earlier work on on morality. Of the three areas demanding public intervention that Smith sets out, the first two will be found in even the most ardent of privateers' writings: the military and courts of law. Every society requires the monopoly on violence secured by the sovereign to protect against civil war and foreign invasion. Related to this, every society also requires that the state uphold the principles of law and justice. Every society requires legislation and an executive power with the capacity to enforce it. However, in addition to this, Smith adds education as a third of his public works on describing in terms of the attention of government necessary in order to prevent the almost entire corruption and degeneracy of a great body of the people. Did somebody tell Trump that? What's interesting here is that education for Smith ought not be primarily concerned with maximizing talents produced by the division of labor, but actually countering the damages and effects of it. On considering the different types of education for the different orders of people, he writes the following. In the progress of the division of labor, the employment of the great body of people comes to be confined to a few simple operations. The man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations, of which the effects too perhaps are always the same or nearly the same, has no occasion to exert his understanding or exercise his invention in finding out expedients for removing difficulties which never occur. He becomes stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. His dexterity in his own trade in this manner to be acquired at the expense of his intellectual, social, and marital values. But this is the state into which the laboring poor, the great body of people, must necessarily fall unless government takes some pains to prevent it. So basically, he's like, when we over privatize shit, everyone becomes an idiot. This is the hyper specialization issue. When you go to, that's why when you go to the fucking doctor, they don't know shit about anything else, because you ask them about, like, I had a friend the other day at the gym telling me that she had a guy come in and he had like a cyst on his groin or something. By the way, this girl crazy, always telling these crazy stories. I'm on the treadmill. She's telling me some stories. I'm like, girl, shh. Um, but she's a nurse practitioner, and she's like, I told him did he ask his dermatologist? And I'm like, girl, men don't go to a dermatologist. Like, you got to point him in a better direction than that. But she can't. It's not her fault. It's an ontological problem. It's an ontological problem because she can't possibly know every fucking skin condition under the sun. And she doesn't have the time to spend with that particular person on investigating it, nor would it be efficient for her to do so. So it's not like, we have idiotism, but it's not her fault she's an idiot. It's because of the over privatization of the medical industry. Okay, class, you're dismissed. That's it. We understand the ontology of idiotism. Yes, they send you to a specialist, sends you to another specialist. Yeah, and I think the interesting thing here is that does that have anything to do with capitalism? Yeah, it has to do with efficiency. It has to do with a rapid accumulation of knowledge and optimization. And gosh, I hope he gets into like standing reserve and Gestell with Heidegger as it pertains to this, because I did a video on cybernetics, and I always laugh because I like misattributed a quote, or I paraphrased a quote from Heidegger. And it's basically the problem of like over optimization. And I hope he's going to talk about that, because I suspect that's part of the ontological issue at play. Surprisingly, this quote could be used in support of a Marxist critique of alienation, and certainly condemns the Taylor's principles integral to capitalism's industrial phase. For Smith, then, the division of labor in the free market did bring into being the most complex and wealthy societies. But in his view, it left entirely without intervention. If left entirely without intervention, they were capable of producing a level of social degeneracy and ignorance that outstripped even the so-called barbarous societies. It might be argued that the free idiocracy. Yo, this is where we get idiocracy. Okay, I've also been thinking because some of you who've been following me for a while, like I tend to have these ideas and I write them in a notebook and then I don't usually finish the piece. But I've been wanting to write the Idiocracy Meets Gattaca paper for a while, and I've been hoping that I'd be able to pull something out of here. Um, and I think this is exactly fucking it. Like the medical industrial complex is the exact meeting point of Gattaca and Idiocracy. It might be argued that the free market has found its own solution to this problem through the use of regular redundancy and the demand to retrain, thereby lifting people out of what Smith regarded as the stupor of repetition and the comfort of habit. The point, however, is not whether we agree with Smith on the type of intervention necessitated by the social relations of free market capitalism. Despite believing in the division of labor supported by a system of free enterprise and exchange, as the best of systems, he still believed that some form of intervention was required. Unlike contemporary idiotism, which claims the work of Smith for itself, he had questions and his concerns about such a system. By contrast, idiotism has expunged any and every doubt. It has become a purified, unblinking faith on the messianic qualities of the free market, liberated from any trace of public intervention, governance, or regulation beyond the juridical military function. The free circulation and exchange of private property is all that's required. And the path to contemporary idiotism began with the work of old Freddie Hayek. What the fuck I tell y'all? Okay. All right. So if you want to understand Freddie Hayek's, let me get my book. Hold on. If you want to understand what he's talking about Frederick Hayek, because I know Jared missed this chapter. I'm going to tell you guys which one to go read or go listen to if you have access to this. Go back and listen to. I'll mark it in this. Make myself a note. I will put it in this recording. Put in recording. Okay. There's a chapter on Hayek. Here it is. It is chapter 8. I knew it was 8. Damn, I got such a good memory sometimes. So chapter 8 of I Am the Master, if you go back and listen to that specific chapter, you will find exactly what I suspect is the author is going to talk about why Hayek is responsible for this. But let's see if he tells us without us going back. But it's a good refresher, anyways, because I never thought of Hayek as like being like part of the psychological industrial complex, and then also believing in some kind of woo-woo. I don't want to say woo-woo, but like emergent market deity kind of situation. That's the wrong way to put it, but like he believed that the market kind of shaped itself and was like this like thing on its own. In the introduction of The Road to Serfdom, Hayek writes, "If in the long run we are makers of our own fate, in the short run we are the captives of the ideas we have created." Writing in 1944, anticipating a post-World War where Britain, the country in which he was exiled, would be required to rejuvenate itself economically, politically, and culturally, Hayek was concerned that the British people were becoming too accustomed to the collectivism necessary for the war effort. His book was intended to recapture the spirit of individual liberty that British philosophers, including Smith, had done so much to contribute to in the past, and challenge that collectivism would need to be retained when the immediate necessity for it had passed. Let me read that again. If in the long run we are the makers of our own fate, in the short run we are the captives of the ideas we've created. Let's see. There exists now the same determination that the organization of the nation which has been achieved for the purposes of defense shall be retained for the purposes of creation. There exists now the same determination that the organization of the nation which has been achieved for the purposes of defense shall be retained for the purposes of creation. So he's, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me, and I hadn't read this when I read The Road to Serfdom, however long ago. I hadn't read Ortega y Gasset. So last year we read Revolt of the Masses, and in the end of the book, he talks about this exact thing, that how nations come together, how sovereign entities come together, is also kind of how they fall apart. And there's this relational thing that happens in solving problems that people come together for. They need kind of a shared problem. I get this now. The system doesn't want more people focused on democracy or social reform. Well, no, of course, the system is going to, well, it depends. If you have a highly privatized system, of course, it's going to, and we do. And this is where my harping on about Citizens United comes in, because Citizens United is one of the key features that has locked us into this privatization. Because if you are a corporation and your sole motive is to gather people together to maximize profits and make the most money possible, you are going to try to ensure the continuation of that. And how do you do that? By writing the laws. And how do you do that? By arguing, by buying lawyers to argue that the First Amendment, the right to free speech, is equivalent to the right to buy everything you want and anything you want. The right to free speech is equivalent to the right of spending money, the right of having money and using your money for whatever you want, including buying a politician. And this is why no one will fucking touch that. It's exactly why. So when we say the system doesn't want you working on reform, that's what we mean. And it's like, and this is what Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about when he talks about the meta crisis, because the meta crisis is not just one thing; it's the convergence of all these things. And even if we just look at one problem, which is the acceleration of like AI or capitalism, whatever you want to say, it's like the same problem, but multiple people, multiple entities, arguably all entities, are rushing towards acceleration of that. So the meta crisis is like, yeah, it's all of these things pushing towards the same outcome all at once. So there's a lot stacked against reform. You're exactly right. The thesis is accurate, but it's by design. Specialization is the key to success. Specialization is the key to success. However, if you were listening to what Adam Smith said, it's also the key to your undoing. Because if, like, see our conversation about the general practitioner, I don't know if you were in here when we were talking about that, but if you over specialize, how do you even consider yourself a physician anymore? I think there's a sweet spot for all things where specialization can be useful and then specialization can be harmful. It leads to absolute idiocy where people have no clue about anything. So there's that. What was required for the nation to be retained for the purpose of creation, Hayek asserted, was the intellectual courage to admit that collectivism, other than at a time of dire emergency, is wrong. There's no greater tragedy, he warns, than the pursuit of our highest ideals unintentionally bringing about the opposite of what we seek. For Hayek, the enemy that Britain was then facing would become its fate if it was to be enthralled by the collectivist spirit. His argument was that an organized economy leads to an authoritarian state, and the collectivist pursuit of the good can only bring about the evils of national socialism. Collectivism, especially in the institutionalized version we call socialism, is the enemy of freedom, according to Hayek. He feared that amongst the sacrifices, the hardships of the war, socialism as an ideology was benefiting from the enforced practicalities of wartime collectivism. This meant that while we were fighting to remain free, we were at the same time building our road to serfdom. In the opening chapter, dramatically entitled The Abandoned Road, Hayek sums up the situation as follows. For at least 25 years before the specter of totalitarianism became a real threat, we had been progressively moving away from the basic ideas on which Western civilization was built. That is, that this movement on which we have entered with such high hopes and ambitions should have brought us face to face with the totalitarian horror that has come as a profound shock to this generation, which still refuses to connect two facts. Yet this development merely confirms the warnings of the fathers of the liberal philosophy, which we still profess. We've progressively abandoned that freedom in economic affairs, without which personal and political freedom has never existed in the past. Liberalism then privileges the individual and its freedom, its respect for the individual man qua man, the recognition of his own views and tastes as supreme in his own sphere. This is very much in keeping with the philosophical tradition that posits the autonomous subject as the foundation of morality, politics, and law and economic activity. Hence, this means that the capacities of human reason for spontaneous creation and deliberate reflection, exemplify the independence of thought and the deed that must be protected and nurtured if man is to be fully human. Let me stop right there and say this is exactly what I'm saying about Citizens United. Raise your hand in the chat. Actually, yeah, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down in the chat. Is freedom of speech the same thing as freedom of wealth? Thumbs up or thumbs down. Is freedom of speech the same thing as freedom of wealth? Not freedom to have wealth, but freedom to spend your wealth. Is that the same thing as your freedom to speech? Should you be able to spend your money on whatever you want, just as you are able to spend your words on whatever you want? Or are there some limits? Arguably, there are limits to even free speech. You can't be inciting violence with your speech. Those are two different comparisons. Yeah, Jacob says thumbs down. Strauss equates modern liberalism with freedom to gain and spend money. Wait, which Strauss? Which Strauss? JM says no. I agree. Yeah, I agree. Colin says no. Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. But this is what he's saying. So this is what Hayek is saying. That we need to be free to do whatever we want, basically. Like, yeah and no. Like, there's limits to this shit. In light of this, liberalism for Hayek goes beyond any stationary creed tied down by hard and fast rules, and it's the best possible way to make use of the spontaneous forces of society. Hence Hayek's fear concerning the acculturation of the wartime mentality and the two social and political pillars of organization and collectivism. So here's the other thing. So what Hayek was really afraid of, and we read about this. See, that's what I haven't read of Strauss. That's what I need to read. I haven't read that. Yeah, I was just interested in his esotericism. But yeah, I know Strauss has got like a lot of other things to read. Thank you. Okay, wait, what was I saying? I got really excited about that. Oh, organization. So if you go back to chapter 8 in Eye of the Master, and you read through what he's saying here, he's talking about Hayek's fear of an organized economy, of like a centralized economy, where, I agree with Hayek on this part, that prices cannot be absolutely fixed. So there's no way of ever knowing exactly how much a pound of grain should cost. Some of those people at the time were claiming, and I forgot the guy's name, it was in the book, we're claiming that you can calculate, this is like that social calculus stuff. You can calculate how much a loaf of bread should be. I argue, no, it very much matters. Now there's an upside and a downside to this. The upside of that is you can take into account whether or not people are starving. Okay, yes. But then there's the other part, which we're seeing play out now with like DoorDash, where they have price hikes. So they can hike prices based upon the context. But this is all based on a planned economy. So if this is part of the problem that we're not ready to solve yet. But if you can hike the prices for one person, you can hike them for another person at another time. And we see this kind of dynamic pricing all over the place now. Who should set the prices? That is a great question. I'm not an economist and I don't want to answer that question, but I do think that it's somewhere between letting the market just fucking go all day long into whatever it wants, which basically will lead to unfettered whatever the fuck we have now, and then having a very planned social economy. I think it's somewhere between there. Is the only thing I can say. And I suspect he's going to argue that there's some ontological issue at play here as well. And I'm not sure what it is, but let's continue. If these remain part of the post war psyche, Britain will have exchanged the liberal principle of freedom from coercion for the socialist principle of freedom from necessity, for which Hayek is no freedom at all. Reading Hayek today becomes very interesting if one is in any way sensitive to the ways in which market liberalism has become increasingly dogmatic, if not fundamentalist. The fears that authoritarianism was on the horizon, even with successful completion of the war, has turned out to be very true. The only difference is that the authoritarianism that currently dominates is very much based in the tradition that Hayek claimed to be advocating for. The problem, seemingly endemic to economics, or at least neoliberal strain, is that the pursuit of both economic purity as the best defense against tyranny and the desire to operate as if it is a natural science has emptied itself of both philosophy and sociology that would make a rigorous social science of it. Yeah, yeah, fascinating. I like this guy. I like this guy a lot. The sort of economics that still has a stranglehold over the discipline today makes all sorts of claims about the human condition and behavior, as well as asserting a host of principles pertaining to the socio political realms. But in fact, it has very little to say about any of those things. Orthodox economics has spent so much effort attaining the kind of rarefied abstraction that justifies its basic axioms. So I'll show in chapter 3 that it has very little basis in the actuality of human existence. Oh, please do us a economics debunking. The result has been that in the last few decades, the promotion of the pure form of market liberalism has very little to do with resisting authoritarianism and has very close dealings with dictatorship and tyranny, especially in South America. Recent liberal practices, then, is a far cry from the idealism of Hayek. I also like that he's not fully dogging out Hayek. He's just like, you made some mistakes. The fact that market liberalism is, in the end, comfortable with dictatorships is because it has such a scant regard for political freedom. By arguing that political freedom is derivable only from the securing of economic freedom, something evident in Hayek but more pronounced in the work of Milton Friedman, it fails to understand the dogmatic and authoritarian potential of its own thinking, refusing as it does to properly interrogate or think through the implications of its basic premise. In Hayek, this stems from his argument regarding the totalitarian dangers of collectivism, a condition where every activity must derive its justification from a conscious social purpose. For Hayek, as for other liberals, individual freedom cannot be reconciled with the supremacy of one single purpose to which the whole society must be entirely and permanently subordinated. In this regard, the market, based on free use and disposal of one's property, is assumed to act as a barrier to the imposition of any such single purpose. So Hayek didn't want anybody dominating it, right? So Hayek is kind of a pluralist in a sense, in that he believes we should have a lot of things going at once. It shouldn't just be one particular thing. Um, the other thing I was going to say, I forgot what coin this. I should just say things when I think them. But one thing I was going to say is that it's brilliant that we have we that the powers that be. I don't even understand. I don't know the full history of Citizens United. I learned it once a long time ago, but that the it was through some Republican convention that they did this. It's a brilliant move because you are tying in like the linchpin for this whole system. You're tying it in to the most important liberal concept we have, which is freedom of speech. And so, without fully deconstructing freedom of speech, which nobody wants to do because they're afraid that that we'll basically fuck ourselves, will erode our free speech in so doing. Without doing that, without risking that, we cannot undo Citizens United. This is kind of where the Section 230 thing lies. If you guys have been paying attention to what's going on, like Joseph Gordon-Levitt was all over the news 6 months ago or so, and he's coming out talking about we need reform on Section 230. Now, everybody's saying like, oh, he was paid by the media companies, but it's like, yes, okay, but two things can be true. He was paid by the media companies, and we do need reform on Section 230. The only thing is we probably don't want the reform on Section 230 brought to us by the media companies. And the problem is if we open that reform up, that's exactly where it's going to come from. Oh, I haven't been on his social media. I'm going to have to. I'm going to have to put that. I'm going to have to post that in the Discord. What's wild about it? I'd check my notes after this. Okay. Oh, let's see. A formal system of exchange amongst free and supposedly equal individuals in the market is claimed to be the most suitable ground out of which a more extended notion of freedom can grow. However, what Hayek fails to recognize is that for anything to be supported by a free market within a capitalist system, it can only survive by securing a profit, which thereby achieves supremacy of a single social purpose. It cannot be doubled. Geez, that seems like a glaring hole. It cannot be doubted that anything unable to run at a profit within a capitalist market will cease to be available. Anything that does not, we're already there. Anything that does not pass the test of the free market ought not be mourned because it's automatically invalid, illegitimate, or unworthy as people cannot desire or want it. That's bars right there. I feel like that's bars for the whole book. And when I posted my story the other day and I said, idiotism is what happens when we let desire run wild, I meant that in an Aristotelian way, where if we don't have, the reason and the spirit, and we just are pure appetite, this is what we get, dumb shit. This is, of course, because the market is only assumed to be the formal exchange between free and equal individuals, ha ha ha, but also supposed to represent the aggregate of social will, where the market canvasses unmediated desire. And it does, but again, it's raw desire rather than it's not just unmediated desire, it's just all desire. Clearly, it will be necessary to return to this issue, but for now, we need only recognize that from this perspective, where profit becomes the measure of all social activity, we can already see the market as anything but purely formal. Leaving aside for the moment the discussion of the social operations at work within a market that make it genuinely problematic to speak of it as a realm free and equal exchange, as a realm of free and equal exchange, it's clear that market liberalism already contains within it a substantialist argument about what's good and what's not. What's good makes a profit and survives. What's bad runs into loss and should be allowed to wither and die. That everything gains its legitimacy, social value, and capacity to endure only by securing regular and continuing profit in a market of purely private exchange is exactly the sort of social goal that Hayek equates with totalitarianism. Not only that, it's not just a capacity to endure by securing a regular and continuing profit. It has to be an increasing profit. It can't just be regular and recurring. No. The market wants gains, baby. Like a fucking cancer. In every aspect of our lives, we are becoming captive to the idea that only the private realm can cater for the variety of personal desires and deliver the breadth of public provision. This means that in every aspect of our lives, we are driven by the substantial unifying goal of profit that takes on the characteristic of Gleichung, Gleichschaltung of all minds. I really got to take German, you guys. The amount of German philosophers we read, it's crazy. That Hayek saw it as central to totalitarian efforts at social control. In his note, as his editor notes, Gleichschaltung was a term used by the Yazis to speak of the coordination of all political, economic, cultural, and even recreational activities. But the exiled members of the Frankfurt School were writing about the same about the nascent totalitarianism they perceived in American capitalist culture, where all aspects of life were increasingly coordinated through commodity. So coming out of the Yazis, coming to America, I think he's talking about like Adorno, for example. He's like, oh fuck, wait, this totalitarianism, this is the same shit over here. It's just different. What essentially are the human version of the paperclip problem. Yes. JM, that now see, that is why I quote Nick Land sometimes, because Nick Land has this base belief that AI is capitalism, that they're one and the same thing. And I need to do more reading on him. But like, as you'll see, I use a lot of people that I don't agree with entirely. Like, you can be fucked up and wrong about some shit and right about other shit. Like, it's called being fucking human. But that's one thing I agree with. Like, you just nailed it right there. The human version of the paperclip problem. And I think the paperclip problem, if we look at it ontologically, as Curtis is suggesting, is exactly what we're seeing here. So it's rooted in the same stuff. Hayek's charge is that the planning required by collectivism assumes a complete ethical code. In such a situation, he contends that the state ceases to be a piece of utilitarian machinery intended to help individuals in the fullest development of their individual personality and becomes a moral institution imposing on its members its views on all moral questions. In this sense, the Yahtzee state is moral, while the liberal state is not. So complete ethical code. So Hayek believed, and this is from this is another thing that you can read about in chapter 8. Hayek believed that you would have to have all the data to be able to make an assumption. Now, okay, let's use an example of something we don't have all the data for, like the Drake equation. The Drake equation is something we have a very big confidence interval on. So we don't know all of the potential planets that could be out there. So that's a big fucking number, to not know. It's a big piece of missing data. Hayek didn't want to do the social calculus on how much a loaf of bread should cost because he was like, we're missing a lot of fucking data. Now, I agree with him on that. And he said, and I agree with him that if we start filling in the fucking gaps with information we don't have, you are inherently injecting your own biases, the hegemonic biases, into whatever equation you make. So I agree with him on that. This reference to utilitarian machinery is in a chapter devoted to the rule of law and the need for that law to be purely formal. But what Hayek either fails to see or actively denies is that the market already contains the substantial moral claims I've referred to above. Now, I don't like this argument because basically, like, Curtis is basically saying, like, well, we're already doing that anyways. Like, I agree, but the problem is that shit's already rolling. Okay, so Hayek's like, we shouldn't intervene. And it's kind of one of these counter induction situations that, like, if the market's already rolling and we don't have all the information, how do we know we're intervening in the right way? How do we know our interventions are good or bad? Now, this is the problem. This is why I don't have the solution, nor does anyone else. This is the entire problem of economics. Who's supposed to qualify each market? Exactly. That's the problem, Shogun. Quantify. Yeah, I know what you meant. Yeah, no, that's exactly the problem. So his purely formal mechanism already assumes that society should serve the individual first, that self should be privileged over others, sameness over difference, competition is good, and the single measure of social happiness is profit. Yeah, he's totally right. In fact, what this argument about the formality of the law seems to aim at isn't the importance of formality at all, but the naturalization of inequality and privilege, which I think a lot of people have subscribed to. They go, well, I think a lot of people reject Marxism because they think it's about equality, and they think that people are different. People are different, and you can't homogenize them. And I think yes, but also we are all very much the same in a lot of ways. So I don't think people are really having a good dialectical understanding that two things can be true, that we are the same and we are different in a lot of ways. In a striking passage, he writes, any policy aiming directly at a substantive ideal of distributed justice must lead to the destruction of the rule of law. This is because, according to Hayek, the rule of law treats everyone the same. To give people to give different people the same objective opportunities is not to give them the same subjective chance. It cannot be denied that the rule of law produces economic inequality, and is all that can be claimed for it is that this inequality is not designed to affect particular people in a particular way, not intentionally designed. What's the incentive for someone to make something if someone else is quantifying it? Well, I guess if you're thinking in the current market logic, people have to do that anyways. So I don't know that that's a relevant question. Like there are plenty of incentives. And even within this market paradigm, there are incentives for people to do that. You do that all the time. Like think about people who design apps. They have to be able to put it onto the Apple store. So people do that all the time, even as it stands. But what Hayek seems to be relying on here is an argument for a formal system that protects both natural equality and natural inequality, depending on whatever one suits his purpose. Firstly, the law should treat everyone equally because humans are fundamentally the same. They are, yeah, okay. They are deserving of protection by the law because they are all by nature reasoning creatures. Hayek's argument is that this can only be done formally. In other words, substantial differences can't be taken into account because people would not be treated the same. However, if we are supposed to be protecting individuals, what makes an individual's individual is precisely the inequality of their experience, biography, and material conditions. To abstract individuals from the materiality of their lives is no longer to have individuals, but some empty template of sameness that seems rather more totalitarian than Hayek would care to admit. Let me read that again. To abstract individuals from the materiality of their lives is to no longer have individuals, but an empty template of sameness. Okay, so what he's saying is just by saying that, he is kind of stripping them of their individuality, anyways. There's like a paradox there. Secondly, when we do consider material conditions, it's perfectly correct, according to Hayek, to accept the economic inequality that we find. So if you find some people are poor and some people are rich, that's totally fine. The argument is that because the system of private property reflects a natural condition, the inequalities it produces are also natural. Okay. If an apple is growing in my yard and I decide to burn all of the apples instead of feeding a poor child that walks by, that's natural, huh? That's just the way shit goes, isn't it? Okay. I don't know if that's the kind of natural I think we want, but okay. The law as it stands, I mean, by that by that rule, we should all just perish. You know, the law as it stands has not designed this, but merely facilitates the natural inequality we find amongst individuals. This means that when making an argument about how society ought to be conceived, we assume that the naturalness of formal equality We assume the naturalness of formal equality. But if we wish to make an argument about society as it is, we rely on the naturalness of substantial inequality. Okay. So he's like, um, substantial inequality versus formal inequality. So he goes, nature ought to be, the formal inequality is like what already exists. We've set this up, and so that's what ought to be. But what is the naturalness of substantial inequality. I'm not sure what he means exactly by substantial, but he's saying what it is. I don't know, but basically it's different. What it ought to be is not what it is. I'm not sure what he means by that, but I have to look that up. By substantial inequality versus formal and formal equality, substantial oh, okay, I read that wrong. So what ought to be, when we think about what ought to be conceived, we assume the naturalness of formal equality, that we ought to treat people as equal. But when we think about what society really is, people are not equal. So there's a problem there. Where Hayek takes this argument, though, is also very revealing and exemplary of the abstraction and doublespeak so crucial to contemporary idiotism. After the argument has been made supporting both formal equality and substantial inequality, Hayek explicitly collapses the two by arguing that the conflict between formalism and substantivism accounts for the widespread confusion about the concept of privilege and its consequent abuse. To call private property as such, which all can acquire under the same rule, a privilege because only some succeed in acquiring it, is depriving the word privilege of its meaning. So if that's rough. Is it a privilege? So this would be the thing. Is it a privilege to be rich? Yes or no? Is it a privilege to be rich? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Because Hayek is saying no, it's not a privilege to be rich. Is it a privilege to be born attractive? You say no, it is not a privilege to be born rich. You say JM says yes. Is it a privilege to be born rich? Yeah, let's say that. Is it a privilege to be rich? Yes or no? Is it a privilege to be born rich? No and no. Oh wow. Okay. So this is what Hayek thinks. So Hayek would agree with you that it is not a privilege. Because a privilege is something that you acquire. I suppose I don't know exactly what he means by that, but because it's natural, basically. Being rich doesn't say anything about what else you are. But if you are rich compared to the rest of people, let's look up the word privilege. Let's look up the definition really quick. Yeah, let's look it up because a privilege is a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. It is often earned but can be unearned. So, is not being rich an advantage? Is not being rich an advantage? Indubitably. Yeah, so I disagree, Shogun. I think being rich is a privilege. I think that word that the word we hear a lot now, we don't like it because we're like, it implies that it is unearned. Now, a privilege can be earned. I think that's the distinction here. It's like, like your privileges can be revoked in a sense. Like my daughter has a privilege of having a phone. And if she misbehaves, that privilege is revoked. But it is indeed a privilege. She has a special condition of having access to what I think a lot of parents wouldn't give her access to. Like she has a lot of free reign. She has a lot of freedom, which I consider a privilege. My cousin's parents are rich and my cousin is a doucher and broke. What does that have to do with the fact that he grew up privileged by money? Your money can be revoked, spent, or stolen. Liquid hot. Is being rich a privilege or not? Is being born rich a privilege or not? All right, let me finish this chapter while you guys answer. So in this scenario, substantial inequality, the fact that people have private property and some don't, is nothing but the chance of formal equality. Everybody has, or is nothing but the expression of formal equality, which is everybody has a chance. So that's what he's saying. He's like, the only reason, this is the whole argument of like people start in a race, right? People start in a race and somebody wins the race. The only reason they're able to win the race is because they started out different than the other people. So, in a competitive framing, that would not be an advantage. That would just be something it's just, it is an advantage. So, yes, it is a privilege, but it's like Hayek considers that kind of natural. I think one of the places we accept privilege, and we don't really consider it privilege, is like sports. We're very cool with competition in sport because we're like, oh well, it's remarkable, it's interesting, it's fascinating. So I think sports this is where it's like a really interesting place to talk about this kind of thing. No, those are two very different things. Earning wealth is not a privilege, but a duty. Being born into wealth is a privilege. Interesting. So, I mean, we just looked up the definition of privilege, and it can be earned or unearned. A privilege can be earned or unearned. Like my daughter also gets a privilege of getting an allowance, and she, in order to get that privilege, must earn it. If she, like, she got $10 taken away because she done fucked up the dishes. Like, I mean, take it out of our paycheck. So that is a privilege that is earned. And I guess, we're getting into semantics here, but um in any event, Hayek thinks it's natural to be able to acquire wealth. Um and the naturalness is what's the problem here. So Curtis is like taking issue with his idea of what is natural. I see your point. Being rich, you gain access to more resources regarding health. Yeah, no, and I mean, you can't say that rich people like. So I know Shogun's point is that he knows plenty of rich people that are miserable. But let's think about like life as a existence game. Okay, everybody's got to die. Brian Johnson he's got a way better shot. He's got way more access to life than anybody else. I forgot what they doing with his girlfriend. She just got like some crazy like, you know, vajayjay like screening or something that they've never done before. Wealth is a part of nature that we make unnatural. Yeah, there's a lot to say about this, guys. Um, but that's it. I'm cooked for today. We will pick up tomorrow, same time, same place, on page 39, Undermining Coercive Power. The recording will be available, I believe, tomorrow morning. I'm just uploading the second session today. The first one's up. This weekend's lecture is up. This will be up tomorrow morning. Not everyone is born with the same health or body part complete. Yeah, that's true. But is that natural? I mean, yeah, the problem is with this word natural. Like we also have this naturalistic fallacy where we believe that because this is the way things were set into motion, that that's the way that it should continue in motion. Doesn't have to. Doesn't have to. If we look at like natural laws of physics, an object in motion will stay in motion until it meets a greater or equal force. Okay. Bye, guys.